Howdy, everybody, and welcome to Game Master Soapbox. Today, as usual, I have got a slew of things to talk about, and they're all written up here in the list. And of course, you can read them yourself, but I'll be going over them real quickly before we get to them. And as usual, I'm going to go through each one separately and give a little bit of a gap before and after, so that it makes it easier to tear them apart later. But I think today's going to be one of the best shows I've done in a while, and maybe actually the best show ever, because we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff that really I think is going to be helpful to drive your local game sessions through the roof as far as being really exciting and challenging and all of that. First of all, we're going to talk about the most dreadful three-letter acronym in any role-play game, and that is a TPK. I'll explain what it is. Many of you already know, and I think I'm probably hearing nods in the audience today for that. Yes, I'm sure that you know what a TPK is, but we'll get to that in a minute. Then we're going to talk about three broken combinations, and what I mean by that is we're going to look at some player decisions that make the game difficult to deal with, and they're broken not in a good way in my estimation. And of course, as always, I entertain any countering opinions. If you don't agree with me, definitely put your words in on that one. Then we're going to talk about the secret to making your encounters memorable. How do you make it kind of sticky and something that the players will bring back to mind from time to time? Then we're going to talk about how you actually can win at role-play games. I know that I'll probably get some pushback on that one as well. That it seems like a ludicrous thing to say, but there are people that really want to know the answer to that question, and so I will reveal to you today how you win at role-play games. Then my rant today will be on open book spellcasters. This is maybe a isolated incident, and maybe I'm the one that has a problem with it, but we'll go into that bit for a little bit. And then we're going to talk about how you can get a copy of the NycosRPG rules for yourself. The PDF has got a $10 value, but you can get it absolutely free if you stay to the end and take note of the way you get a hold of it. And that will be an ongoing thing for some time to come, because it's really important that we get you get the opportunity to play around with the NycosRPG and see why it really should be used throughout role playing. But anyway, the idea of let's go with the first one of these. TPK, the worst thing to happen in the game. If you are not familiar with the acronym, TPK stands for Total Party Kill. And to a player, a total party kill is a no pun intended, a buzzkill. And you're having a good time playing a game, and suddenly your characters, the entirety of every person in the group, is laid waste. They're dead. There's no story to continue, no saving grace by which the players might be healed or could return to the game as they are. It's done. And while TPKs are horrid and a real challenge, they are the worst thing that can happen in a game, more to the storyteller. And that's because if a party is dead, the story has ended. There's no place to go. There's no stretch. If the players have willed themselves into such a position, there's nothing that can be done about it. And if it was an overplay by the game master in terms of imbalance, then there's nothing you can do with that either. And it's a horrible, horrible feeling. I've only effectively done TPKs 3 times, and I did have a TPW, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. The first time that I did a total party kill was inadvertent. In other words, I had described to the players a situation, and I thought surely the way I described it, they were going to have none of it. That it was not going to be something that was palatable to them. It was intended to be a game master bluff, and my players took it upon themselves to see my bluff as a challenge. And since I had stipulated particular things in the setting up of the encounter, it just went from bad to worse. Now, when you think about a game master's coordination of an event, you would think it'd be absolutely impossible for a party to be eliminated without the game master being complicit. And to a certain extent, I suppose you would be correct in that the ultimate decision on anything is up to the game master. But in certain cases, the death of even a single player can be coordinated and can be arranged. I had a player in particular that wanted very badly to be heroic to the biblical version, the ultimate level, and that was that he wished to die for his cause. And we had coordinated it several weeks in advance. Even the other players were aware of what we were trying to execute, and as it turned out, it didn't have nearly as strong of an effect because we all were aware of it. So it was not as you have a picture in your head of what you think that the game will feel like or what the session will feel like, and then things don't always go that way. But so the first time I did it was an accident. It was not being aware of where we were in the round or with the hit points of the players and the graduated skill level of the players. In particular, I was a little off on my calculation, and so that one was, I suppose, the easiest of the three to work with because we all kind of knew that it was a bad situation and it was a mistake, but there's not a lot you can do to call the mistake of the decisions that were made back. The second time was intentional, and all I mean by that is that the games had ceased being fun for the majority of us. We had a couple of players who were rather onerous in their response to the other players, and there was I suppose a level of as yet unidentified or unrecognized bullying going on, and the players they were not disappointed when the TPK happened. It was in certain cases a relief because the sessions wouldn't continue any longer, and it was definitely by intent. It was an opening the door and a setting up of parameters where the player actions had little to do with the actual outcome, and there were even a couple of the players who afterwards felt that I had been rather ham-handed about it and that they saw through the reality that the game session was intentionally trumped up to end the series. Of course, the argument could be made that you just simply could say, no, we're done, we're not playing anymore. But any time that there is a pressure put on the person administering the game to continue the hosting of an event or the continued play of a game, it's a tougher nut to crack than you might consider, because you have social contracts and agreements to do things when you are hosting that you have to make good on, or else you tear up your social credit score, so to speak. So the final time it happened, it was absolutely a train wreck, and even the players that made the mistakes were aware, and they went into this scenario eyes wide open, in that they were already in a captured state by villains that they knew were ultimately killers, and nonetheless they decided to attempt heroics, knowing the odds and throwing the dice, knowing that if they failed, that the group was gone. And that's what happened. Is that it was the beginning of a session. We were going to do a breakaway. They'd been kidnapped or captured, and the bad guys were about to be resoundingly defeated and pushed back, and the situation would open up, and the players would be able to make their getaway. And since we were leaving the specifics to die rolling, the dice, of course, inevitably let you down, and what was going to be an absolutely heroic rescue ended up being a dismal whimper of a failure, as they were the only ones who were free at the moment, and cascaded their mistakes and got the group waxed in their cells. So yeah, TPKs are the worst thing that can happen to a game, and of course the easiest thing is to say, well, we would not have a TPK. I'm not going to get. You're all safe. But that's unrealistic, because if you do not have a danger element in the game at all, then that's also a really bad thing. There need to be some means by which the risks can be managed. But in more than 45 years, it's probably amazing to know that I only had 3 of those. So those were horrible, horrible memories. And the only upshot of it is that a TPK is also usually a clean slate beginning, because the players aren't going to replicate anything that was in the game that might have contributed to that. And so you may have reined in some bad behavior and put a fine point on playing with the group and playing by the rules that you might not have gotten to otherwise. So there probably is a silver lining to a TPK, but IDK, what that would be. Aha! See what I did there? Alrighty. 3 broken combinations, not connections. Combinations, of course, are referring to skill or feature or feats that are merged together to make something that is either untenably powerful or completely impotent and useless. So broken can be on either end of the spectrum. And in my case, when I speak of broken combinations, I was being a little disingenuous in using the phrase broken here, because what I'm referring to, 3 broken combinations, are groups that are doomed from the beginning. They're player types that shouldn't be put in the same room and end up with a problem in every one of them. And the first of the 3 broken combinations, one of the 3 situations that you never want to put together, is you never want to put together 3 driver personalities in the same game session, and each has its own agenda that is not originally intended and sculpted to work together. I had a situation about 10 years ago where I brought together 3 very bright and very intelligent and very clever players, and each of them in their own right was a driver. And by that I mean each one of them would listen to the description of a scene, and then they would make it their own by internalizing the definitions and the descriptions and spit out their own version, which the other players in their groups, when they ran separately, would bite into, and then you could run the game flawlessly with that one player as your driver helping to push the story forward. But in this case, I put 3 of them in the same group, and by the end of the first session, they were calling for PvP rules. They wanted to see which one of them was the most powerful, because in their minds, they were all equally correct on where the group should go, and each of them was going in a different direction, but they thought that I should be pressuring the other 2 to follow their lead, and it got to be acrimonious to the point where when they left my house, 2 of them have never been back to my house at all. And that is the worst of a broken combination, is that if you lose a player over any game, it's tragic, but when you lose the entire group, you're really in trouble. And this concept of a broken combination when you have 3 drivers is particularly egregious if there are a considerable number of people in the group. And at the time, the groups we were running were 9, 10, 12 players in a game session. And some game masters don't do well with those kinds of groups, that large of a group. Some groups do really well because many of the players fall into a category other than driver, and so they don't mind being the window dressing supposedly of the entire group. But having the 3 drivers in the same group was a nightmare combination, and I don't recommend you put yourself in that case. Now, to do that, you would have had to actually played with your players long enough to know what their personality is. And in a video next week, I'm going to be doing the characteristics of players as a video, and so we'll go over all of that at that point. But the second of these broken combinations is that you get a player or 2, usually 1, that has a voiced opinion that is in opposition to a tenet of the RPG that you're running, and they have decided that they are going to use the entire campaign to challenge that assessment. In particular, I was running a campaign where someone became particularly attracted to a specific creature type, and I'm not going to go into which one it was, but they took that creature type and they elevated its worth within their own minds and superimposed that single-mindedness to the group they were a part of, to try to drive the party to make decisions based on that tenet rather than the reality of the situation. And the pressure of it actually caused the group to implode in the presence of a major baddie, and it didn't cause a TPK, but it did set them all back a considerable distance as they had to wrestle with their own disagreements while busy defending themselves against the monsters. So when you run a campaign and you put a player in a system who has an agenda or an opinion that is different from what is been defined as the convention of the game series, you set up a combination that's meant that is destined to break the model, so to speak. And the third problem or third broken combination is bringing together 3 or more player mutants. And I'll go into what those are. I'm not referring to that as an adverse thing, but there are persons who play, well, the easiest way to say it is that some people play the game to watch the world burn. They play the game specifically to put the story and the game master in a position where the game master has to allow the story to burn down a bit in order to allow the players to accomplish what they want to, and they seek to leverage the game environment so that there is no other alternative than watching the fire. And this concept of anarchy that this represents is far, far more common than you might think, because players, as I've said before, players play for their own reasons, and a game master doesn't necessarily know how to handle them, and certainly doesn't want to face the level of adversity he would have to quell those tendencies. It's sometimes better to just let them run their course, but it's kind of a rough call. But these 3 broken combinations will take your game to places you don't want to go, and it's practical. I know that this is probably dry and irrelevant to most players, because that these situations will only come up in a blue moon. But with as many tables that as I have run, it's more common and inevitable than you might think. All right. So everybody wants to know how to make the game that they're playing the best game ever. And how do we go about creating memorable encounters? Well, there are as many possible answers to this question about what is the secret as there are game masters out there. So it probably is no surprise for me to say that what I'm sharing is my secret to memorable encounters, and it's only an assessment after the fact, because I have discovered that you cannot pick the day they're going to remember. You cannot pick even the NPC that's going to draw attention. It's a matter of what is going on with the players as a group, what they are individually facing in their own minds at that moment, and what they particularly find charming, clever, silly, whatever. So the secret to memorable encounters is the following. Number 1, you want a memorable encounter to be in a place that itself is iconic. If you are planning on running an adventure and you're going to run it on a woodlands roadway in the mountains, that's about as common and simplistic as a locale as possible, and it's going to set your situation at a disadvantage for becoming memorable. Doesn't mean it can't happen, because as I said, the players are going to take it where they're going to go. But one of the secrets to a memorable encounter is put it in a place that is unique. You know, you're on the top of a volcanic mountain next to where the volcano caldera is, and there's a inordinate number of rabbits that are loose on the hill there for some awful reason, and so there's a horrible chance that the aroma of burning rabbit is going to be traumatic. The weirder and more odd a place, the more likely that the place will be remembered. Even if it's not remembered in toto, at least it will establish an oddness in the mind that makes it something that is to be remembered. The second thing that you need to have a memorable encounter is you have to have NPCs worthy of being remembered. As I've spoken about before, you have non-player characters, you have recurring recurring characters, and you have story characters. And while the story characters are integral to the development of a story, they are the people who have the pieces of information that need to be front-loaded to the players. They are not necessarily memorable. It may actually be the second tier, the odd one out, the linking mechanism that becomes what they remember. So the estimation of what you think people are going to find memorable is sometimes not as clearly defined as you might think. The next piece of making a memorable encounter is that the decisions they make need to have some kind of gravitas. If you are having an adventure go through a bog or a swamp, and the secret to the universe's peace is found within that caravan. If the bog itself is passable and the die rolls are reasonable and all of that, there's very little to be remembered compared to any other, with the possible exception that if I've mentioned it sometimes, it becomes memorable for the fact that I mentioned it. So I'm sure that 3 months from now, somebody's going to run across me at an event. They're going to ask me about my memorable bogs. So some great examples of pieces that would be memorable would be like the to use the term exactly, the bog of eternal stench. And people who know what that reference is, they can go ahead and take a BP and just mention it to me the next time you're playing that you saw it in the video, and you'll be granted one BP for whichever character you're playing at the time. And the final piece of a memorable encounter is that your retelling of the story has to be embellished in some fashion, so that the players can also see why it's important to remember it for you. And when you, as the storyteller and the game master, find something to be remembered, then the players will be reminded of it whenever those particular situations come up again. And I know that people that are watching me are thinking, this guy's hubris is as big as a house. And I can only tell you that the number of players that have been in my game that have had a good time is countless, and the stories that they retell and retell and retell are numerous. And it's a hoot to talk to the players who've played in several different games and campaigns, because they've even seen points of juxtaposition where the choices they made in one campaign they reversed in the later campaign without even realizing it. And the humor of situational comedy are every bit as important to the memorable nature of the encounter as was its gravity and intensity. Because if it wasn't particularly funny or clever, then it doesn't really blow up your skirts, so to speak. So there you go. All right. So next comes, how do you win at roleplay games? And those of you that have played roleplay games for any length of time certainly have an opinion about this one. And the normal answer to the question of how can you win at RPGs is that you cannot. There are no stipulations or judging rules to determine who is a winner at an RPG, except that I believe that there is. I believe that the way that you can win at an RPG is to become immersed enough in the story that the decisions that you make in story are the same decisions you would make if the situation were actually you in the story. The purpose or the method by which role-playing games resolve things has everything to do with the feel, the experience, the energy of the decisions that are made, and how important or how silly or how contrived they are. And I can tell you that we've had role-play sessions that were bang on perfect. Everybody had a great time. Decisions got made. Bad guys were defeated. Good guys got to pull off some surprises, etc., etc. And these are wins. And the easiest way to win at an RPG is to play them all as if you were in that story. The concept of the internalization of your character is critically important to the enjoyment of the game. And to me, it's really kind of depressing and sad when you see the number of game masters who, instead of driving their players to take up the mantle and become a part of the story, instead choose to draw a line in the sand and say, well, I'm not a railroader. I'm not going to give you any recommendations on what you should do. As a matter of fact, if you feel like I have at any point, then we're going to backtrace and eliminate that part out of the game. Because yes, I know that there is a certain segment of people that just want to watch the mechanism work. They want to roll the dice and move the mice and see how the scenario plays out mechanistically without any drivers from the players or from the game master. But the reality is that the very basis of role play games is that you are trying to establish in the players the roles that they are portraying, so they are playing the roles in a game. And yes, the game can be a non-linear series of events that only by happenstance seem to coincide as a primary story. But there are as many times when a well-constructed adventure series doesn't leave the feeling of a railroad and yet very much is planned from first introductions till the final adventure concludes. So the element of winning is the element of immersion, because when you are fully immersed and the situation becomes dangerous and the actions become critical and the mechanisms that all trigger and come into place all seem to match up and make the story either succeed wildly or fail catastrophically or send everybody into gales of laughter. Those are all wins in a role-play game. So how do you win? You play with the intensity that the story means something, and whether it does or whether it does not, playing as if it did puts your mindset in a place that makes the game experience more fun. So, all right. So now we're going to start into the rant, and as usual, I'm going to pause for a few seconds here to let the clock get set up specifically so that I won't overrun the time on this one. And this is more, I think, a direct attack on the way roleplay games have evolved, not on the particular players that the name seems to suggest. But alrighty, here we go. In Dungeons and Dragons, there are certain character classes who are intended to, by their intelligence, choose the list of spells that they will be casting over the duration of the next 24 hours or so in the game. And this intelligence numerically is supposed to represent the fact that the player's ability to make a decision is impeccable. And while that mechanism is somewhat antiquated, as we all have access to spell cards or spell lists or alternate casting requirements and all these different variables, the biggest challenge that I have is that the very purpose of having the high intellect and having the player choose the spells in advance is obviated when the player literally is sitting with the game, in the game, during the session with their player's handbook open to the spells list, and they are spending the majority of the afternoon reading their alternative options and possibilities instead of executing them. And it drives me insane when I think about a player who claims to be intelligent and claims to be, and even if it's clerical magic, some people play it's the clerics instead of the wizards that have to memorize or choose their spells. To me, it seems logical that a religious person would have the ability to have open conversation with their power source and optimize what that is on the fly. But generally speaking, the spellcasters that bug me the most are those that pick out an open book and use that during the entire session, nose in between pages and looking for clever combinations and nigh indestructible alternatives to allow their players to pull off whatever particular set of skills or effects that they wish to. And when you say that you're going to be a spellcaster, to me, you better be on your game as far as what is the beginning of the day, what are you planning to expect during the day, and how that's going to be played out. And it's just so frustrating when you've done the work of building up the villain to the point where the villain spell list is static, but your game group, instead of learning how to deal with the parameters of a pre-generated or pre-created spell list, instead want to vamp along with their villain and set up happy circumstances or crazy circumstances that defeat the whole purpose of the encounter and make it feel more hollow and less special. But maybe it wasn't that much of a rant. It annoys the crap out of me, and so I thought I would share it with you guys. Okay, so now let's get to how you can get to the NycosRPG rules for free. Starting on Saturday, I know I've harped on the Nykos Twitch experiment, but I've determined that the Twitch experiment can be suspended for a few weeks while I try another antic, and that is that there is a website called Starting Games. Let me go and pull it up here. Yeah, it's called startplaying.games. And that mechanism allows for players to sign up to play in a roleplay session and access the host's Discord for conversation and for direction and communication. And so I've scheduled start playing events for NycosRPG, and this is to let you know that anybody who watches this video all the way to the end here and puts the term GM tips in their request to join the Saturday event will receive at no cost a PDF version of the NycosRPG. And anybody who wishes to get a hold of this can also become a sponsor for my Patreon account, and if at any level, in addition to the perks that the Patreon site talks about, I will also send you a free copy of the PDF if you use the term GM tips in your joining of the site. So this is a limited time offer. Today is the 30th of May, and so we will go until the 10th of June. So from now until June 10th, anybody who signs up for one of my events on startplaying.games or who backs our Patreon account at patreon.com/Nykos, I will grant you a copy of the PDF of NycosRPG. I think you're going to find the system is really useful and checks off a bunch of boxes of what's been going wrong with most roleplay games today. So anyway, I want to thank you all for being participants in this episode. I want to also thank my host. As you notice, the logo in the corner, Board Games Paradise in Redlands, California. It's currently the only game store that I go to, and it is a full-service store in Redlands, California. I run games there on Mondays and Tuesdays, and you are invited to become a part of that. Simply show up at Board Game Paradise in Redlands, California, Monday night at 6 p.m. or Tuesday night at 6 p.m. and coordinate to become a member of the game session there. And there's a real community spirit at the Board Games Paradise store, and I know I'd like to have all of you as part of that as well. So thank you to our host. Big shout out to Rich, the owner, and he's had a lot of really good and fascinating things going on in his life. So if you get a chance to meet Rich at the store, say hi and tell him that you know me, and that'll make a big difference. So alrighty, I'm gonna get out of here for the night. I want to thank you all for participating, and if you like what you see, go ahead and follow this channel on Twitch. Subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the button down below and the bell to make sure that you get notifications of whenever we release new properties. Also, make a comment on the site or share this with your friends, because that will help with the algorithm and get more people aware of what we're doing. I am Jonathan Alvin. I am Game Master Jay. This has been Game Master Soapbox. See you all next week. Or tomorrow. Whenever I do the next episode.